Welcome back after that short break, and the second session we have is on innovation and the underwriting process. And to my right I have Andy Roberts, Technical Sales Manager for AIG, and on my left I have Toby Bainbridge, Head of Reinsurance at Royal London. Welcome, gents. So we talked about technology in the previous session. So how can technology be used to improve the underwriting process?
I think we've used technology in a quite crude way for a number of years. So we've essentially just mechanised an existing paper process. I think the next step, which we're all going towards, is actually using technology in a much more interesting way. So using the power of big data, although I don't much like the phrase, to actually allow us to do some more predictive analytics. And we're definitely going in that direction. So the technology is going to empower us to smooth out the wrinkles that occur with underwriting.
Andy?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's generally accepted that technology is going to be key to how we progress and what we do to improve customer outcomes. I think the question is perhaps how exactly do we do that, and how do we recognise what technological innovations have happened, and how do we embrace them for the greater good. And I think few would probably argue that maybe the biggest development that we've had in our perhaps generation has been the advent and proliferation of the internet, and allowing us to submit applications online and be able to address them and produce underwriting outcomes off the back of it. But it's probably worth keeping in mind that not every technological innovation is necessarily a big bang, for lack of a better phrase. So I actually moved house a couple of weeks ago, and as I was clearing out untold amounts of junk that I collected over the last 16 years since I've been there, I found a dial-up modem. I have no idea why I kept it, but for whatever reason I did. But if you go back to when we were using dial-up modems with the never-ending green bar, we wouldn't necessarily immediately then have said, brilliant, we can now submit applications online and underwrite online. It was a gradual development of broadband coming and faster speeds that allowed us to do that. So I think it's for us really to sort of stay on top of what innovations are happening in the technological world in order that we can apply them to our world, but not necessarily take them for granted and wait for them to turn up, but do what we can outside of perhaps the technological world to improve things as we go along, so we're not sitting still waiting for it.
And sometimes the technology might be sitting in our sphere but is not sitting elsewhere. So again, Peter mentioned the electronic GP reports earlier, that apart from outing somebody for working for 20 years in the business, which I'm sure she was quite happy about, it's taken a long time and I'm still not sure we're really there yet. So are we reliant on other factors to actually make this process smoother?
Yes, I mean, we're utterly reliant on GP practices adopting the technology, and frankly we're probably the last on the list of things that GPs want to talk about. Certainly you may be aware of the issues that are going on in Northern Ireland at the moment inside the GP system in there. We know that there are going to be issues that are going to come at the end of the year in relation to just understaffing around that place. So yes, it would be lovely to say this is all going to help us and it's all going to be adopted immediately, but there's absolutely no way it will. So it will be a long drip, as you say, and we're just going to have to innovate as quickly as we can and get people to adopt as quickly as we can. It's going to be a long haul for us all, I think.
That's certainly one of those things I think that fits into the category of a potential problem solver that obviously is out of our hands to a certain extent. So it's brilliant that we could do this and we could do eGPRs and all the rest of it, but we are dependent on the other end of actually doing it. So as Toby says, it's not necessarily a neat solution, and the conversation you were having earlier is it's 20 years down the line since the theory was there and it hasn't necessarily worked. I mean, I'm sure there are some instances where a GPR comes back within an hour or something, but then it's not to say that it will at all. So
no, we've certainly seen some pockets of adoption where they're really quick, and the GP practices want to get this off their desks as well. So they've really engaged with the technology and it's really easy for them, and it's better for us and the customers. But then we piloted in another area in the north of England, and the adoption rate was frankly almost zero. So
in the interim, while we're working through all these technologies, have we overcomplicated the underwriting process?
There's an argument to say so, that's for sure. I mean, I think we'd all love to be in a position throughout the entire journey as providers and as intermediaries and for clients, if we didn't have any underwriting. It would be lovely if we could just offer something straight away, but we are where we are for a reason. The underwriting process as it is that we all pretty much work within, it's there for a reason, and that's what the industry's adopted. I think it's probably incumbent upon us now, though, as providers, to take where we are and to look for ways that we can actually streamline that, and can we reduce question sets, and can we use technology to actually produce quicker online decisions, as opposed to having everything referred into underwriters. I don't think we'd want to get to a situation where there are no people involved. I mean, you've just been having a discussion about robo-advice, and of course that lends itself to robo-underwriting. I think you really, certainly at this moment in time, you need to have intelligent people assessing things. Otherwise you get to a situation where you are accepting the clean lives and you're declining the unhealthy lives, because you haven't got anyone that's able to use pragmatism in assessing that life as a risk. So I think it's an ongoing challenge, is what can we do? How can we reduce questions? How can we use what data that we've accumulated over the years to be able to make our underwriting engines that bit slicker? But I don't necessarily think it's broken. It could just be oiled a little bit, for lack of a better phrase.
Do you think that short-term technology has been a blocker rather than an enabler, because technology is moving on so much in the medical profession that actually we know so much more about illnesses and people living longer who've had illnesses, that it's actually complicated the underwriting process short-term, until we then move on to your part of simplifying that part?
I think there's an element of that. I also think it's a consequence of our chasing ever cheaper prices. So the effect of that has been to drive insurers to make underwriting more complicated. So you're trying desperately to make sure that your standard rates pool is as clean as possible. So you throw more underwriting at it and reduce your potential claims in that pool. And there is a sort of a logical consequence to that. I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of it, but it's you could see that's where we've all gone. Certainly from our perspective, we think that that's probably a retrograde position to be in, or at least it's not fit for everyone. So we're trying to pull apart the underwriting process and make it simpler in some places and accept the complication in others. Obviously, if you've got a very large sum assured case, you're probably going to want to throw an awful lot of underwriting at it. If it's a 100k mortgage case, it's how quickly can you get that done and how few questions you ask. Because ultimately we want the advisor to advise. We don't want them actually jockeying a disclosure process, which, to be honest with you, it feels like they're doing currently.
And do you think data analytics will change the way we underwrite moving forward?
Yeah, so we've got something which is pretty common knowledge, which we've got launched, which does that. So it essentially takes the data that's provided during the mortgage process, and it says basically predict an underwriting outcome out of that, and then we put a layer on top, a small amount of underwriting, just as a backstop. It's relatively quick and simple. It takes the underwriting process from 45 minutes if it's done purely as a straight-through process, or it takes an awful lot longer. It goes out to the back office. It takes it to about 5 minutes.
I think anything that can simplify it for advisors to make them want to embrace selling protection alongside whatever else they might do. So especially if we're talking mortgage brokers, for example, they've got a very, very lengthy process that they have to go through already for the mortgage. It would be very easy for them to think that, I've earned my work, I've earned my money for the day, I've done my day's work. There's no time left with the client to actually have the protection need. Anything that you can do along that sort of lines can only benefit everyone and produce what is fundamentally the goal, is a good customer outcome. But similarly, the more data that we have inputted to us as providers, the more we can use that to streamline processes and make predictions about a person without having to go through more intrusive medicals and GP reports and what have you. So we can use that to our advantage as an industry, and with a collaborative approach as much as anything. Is once those figures get out there, there'll be some that are just shared between us and the reinsurers or are just internal. But the more as an industry that we can harness in terms of information, the more we can apply that. And naturally we're competitors, so we're going to drive each other forward. And the more we can do it, the more efficient things will become. So it can only be a good thing to do.
Yes, the further we can fragment the underwriting process so there's genuine competition, the more innovation we're definitely going to see.
What product proposition innovations are you proud of as a provider then that has helped in this journey?
We're quite proud of the diabetes product. I mean, that will be being rolled out to a few hundred advisors in some weeks, and then we'll probably be going to the full market next year. But I'm quite proud of that. It's essentially talking to a larger group of people who don't usually access insurance particularly efficiently. So when we looked at the proportion of individuals in the UK who have diabetes, and then looked at how many of them were in our insured pools, you're seeing a fraction of the total, and much lower probability of people with diabetes buying life insurance than, say, with asthma or heart disease. So I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of the fact that we're starting to get into a place where you're trying to incentivize people for controlling their condition. So it's like a nudge. If your control gets better, your premiums go down. I quite like it.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think anything along those sorts of lines that doesn't necessarily rely upon technology and the development of technology, which, let's face it, if we rely on that, we are relying on people outside of ourselves, because we're not we're not the people that invent the internet or whatever the next thing is that we don't know is even coming. So anything we can do within our own propositions that doesn't rely upon that can only be a good thing. I mean, we've done a similar thing with diabetes, for example. So we've recently halved the amount of questions that we ask in order to be able to get simpler journeys and a lot more business on the books a lot quicker. Similarly, something else that has been very, very well received was the removal of the requirement for fasting for blood tests. So when you've applied for your application for life cover or for protection, and you've got to have a medical, okay, fine. You've then got to have a blood test, okay, it's getting worse, and now you've got to fast as well before it. It's got to be a morning appointment because you need to be able to eat later on in the day, and then of course you come up against something where somebody's forgotten and eaten something, and then the whole thing falls down and has to start again. So we've removed the requirement to fast, which is, in theory, a fairly simple thing, but has been very, very well received for everyone. So certainly from the underwriting perspective, we're very proud of that. On a proposition side of things, for me personally, probably the biggest project I've been involved in this year was being able to offer cover for non-UK residents, so both British citizens and in many cases foreign nationals as well. And that was demand-led. So we identified a need. There's a lot of people living outside the UK, and therefore there was a big opportunity there. So it was a case of putting in the blood, sweat and tears to actually be able to extend the proposition out there, and most of that blood, sweat and tears was mine. I had a full head of hair a year ago when I started working on that. I'm only 23, I look older, don't I? But
we'll check the app.
Yeah, quite, exactly. So that's certainly something, and that's been incredibly well received. So we're very proud of that. That was worth the effort that we put in. I think probably the other one for me is Key 3, which is, for those that aren't perhaps familiar, is a stripped back version of critical illness cover. So it's very easy to try and outdo each other by keep adding more conditions on to say we've got the most comprehensive one. And last week we retained our position as Best Individual Critical Illness Provider at the Cover Awards, which we're very, very proud of that. But we're aware that there are some circumstances where a comprehensive CI product isn't necessarily the right one. So Key 3 is there, it covers cancer, heart attack and stroke, and it's there to fit that gap. So whether it be an affordability gap, where someone can't afford the best one even though they might want it, or it could be an older life, for example. So not everyone that wants critical illness cover is going to be 30 years old. They could be older, and as we all know, the older we get, the cost of critical illness really, really ramps up. Similarly, they won't necessarily want children's cover. which is included with most comprehensive contracts. So there are some circumstances where a comprehensive one doesn't fit, and therefore we've got that gap. Again, it's not relied on technology to do it. It's just identifying that gap, identifying the need, and building a product or a proposition to fit that gap.
Okay. Don't forget to send your questions in at any time and we'll read them out. You mentioned that simplified product. Do you think, Toby, that's the way the marketing on? We've got too complicated, that we're going to move back to simplified as well, to try and engage the consumer even at a lower level first off?
I think so. I think even when we struggle to understand some of our products, then what hope has the customer or the advisor got? It does beg a belief sometimes that when you look at, especially on critical illness, the length of the definitions and the depth of technical expertise required to actually unpick them is quite phenomenal. So I agree. I think the Key 3 was a very good idea. And certainly we're talking now, or we're starting to unbundle our products. So, for example, TPD and children's cover, and you can see that there's a direction of travel there, which you can say to people, okay, you may not be able to afford a full CI product. Which bits are you really worried about? So maybe it is the cancer, or maybe it's something else, and you can sort of unbundle it and say, okay, well, buy this bit then. And the beauty of that, of course, is it reduces your underwriting process at the same time. So it's sort of win-win for everyone. It definitely feels like the current CI product is ending up being quite niche.
Talking about CI, we had some definitely innovation last year from one provider where they added kick into their relevant life policies. Nobody else has come back out with it. I think there was a view that maybe there would be challenges at some point from HMRC, but that hasn't materialised yet. Do you think other providers will move into that space? Any exclusives?
Well, okay. Exclusively, we're going to have another look at it, but certainly we took QC advice on the subject from a tax specialist, and his view was that it wasn't within the rules. Having said that, you're absolutely right. HMRC seem to have been pretty lax on the subject. They'll seem to be quite happy to give you a nod and a wink that everything's okay, but they won't actually say it out loud, which is quite frustrating. So yes, we're keeping it under review, and we'll take another look. Watch this space, I suppose.
Ditto, to be honest. I mean, I think we were talking about this off air earlier. I mean, it was what we would love is for HMRC to conclusively say one way or the other. I mean, they haven't said very much, but is that really good enough for advisors to be taking that leap of faith, if you like, that HMRC haven't said it's wrong, therefore the assumption must be it's right. So from our perspective, it is always on the radar. And me personally, I would love to see HMRC say, we've reviewed this and for whatever reason, we are now comfortable with CI. Absolutely brilliant. That would be a great outcome for everyone. We have Relevant Life as a very, very popular product throughout the industry for very good reason, that is very tax efficient, and it's a very good way for small businesses to be able to provide cover for their employees where they're not able to get a group scheme. Obviously, that's the whole point of the product. If that can be extended to include critical illness, brilliant. It's a great outcome. And why not? Let's go one step further and add income protection into the mix. If we're able to offer CI, why not let's be able to offer IP? We know as an industry, income protection is massively undersold, largely because it's quite expensive. So if there was a more tax efficient and therefore cheaper way to be able to roll out IP to reduce that protection gap, then that can surely only be a win. So HMRC, if you're watching, write a letter, let us know, and we'll all happily take it forward, I'm sure.
Okay. And moving that one step further potentially with innovation, do you think there is a need or an opportunity for the government to step in here? So we talked earlier about straight through processing in the previous session and making sure that people who needed to be underwritten and premiums loaded potentially weren't forgotten, and it wasn't too expensive. So in the housing market, we've seen Help to Buy and all those to buy schemes. Do you think it'd be a good idea for government subsidies for people where they have medical conditions that it may be slightly subsidised, which then long term could save time and cost within the NHS?
I'd love to say yes, but I can't really see it. I know we've had issues with armed forces personnel and the level of cover that's provided, even when, as a society, we're putting citizens at risk of death or being horribly injured. I'd love the government to offer incentives, rather than maybe not subsidies, but incentives to purchase cover to protect themselves and their families. I rather suspect we won't get it.
Yeah, yes, I'd love to put a different spin on that, but I can't see that it will happen. But I mean, I would go one step further and say not necessarily just those with medical conditions, but if they want to help and they want to encourage people to take out their own insurances, why not go one step further and include any type of insurance with some form of incentive or tax break or however it might be done. And one that comes to mind for me is around social care. So there is known to be a social care crisis in the UK. It was considered to be one of the reasons the Conservatives didn't do very well in the election earlier in the year, was because of their handling of what they would do or not, as the case may be, around the social care. It is always in the media about the problems we've got with underfunding and not enough beds and all the rest of it for care homes. Now, if the government wants to relieve the pressure on itself down the line, and let's face it, everybody's living longer, and this is only going to get worse unless they do something about it. So if they want to take the pressure off themselves down the line, then why not offer some form of incentive now that if there was, if a client was to take out some form of care cover product, of which we do have one, should they want to actually do anything with it, we'd be very grateful. But you know, these products exist. It's not, you know, not just our own, but these products exist that can help alleviate the pressure on the state, and therefore why not get involved and offer some form of incentive that will encourage more people to take it up. It can only work out for everyone's benefit, but as Toby rightly says, it's not necessarily something we'll be expecting a knock on the door anytime soon, but I think we'd all welcome it if it did.
Maybe I'll ask this question again if the government goes from blue to red. Maybe we might get a different. Who knows? Who knows? Depending on the manifesto.
It's always struck me as slightly bizarre that we have the government talking about wanting resilient population and a resilient workforce. Yet they've been plundering the insurance premium tax numbers for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and one couldn't see a government taking that tax down because ultimately they'd have to find the money somewhere else.
Okay, I shall move away from the political agenda now before we go too far. So what barriers do you see to protection sales for advisors that maybe innovation could overcome?
I see speed as really the one thing that we can really aim at. So we have a sales process that is mandated, it's quite long and it's quite difficult. So the best thing we can do is actually speed up the point of process. So the point at which a sale is made, we can get in there and do it much more quickly, and I think technology is going to enable us to do that. And we've talked already about streamlining underwriting processes. That's the thing, to actually get that speed at point of sale up.
Yes, and I can completely see that. I think that is probably the key barrier that most people have, and we could add cost into the equation, or affordability, I should say. I think as much as anything, that's persuading a client of the merit to afford the costs. So if they were to add, their cup of coffee at a particular coffee chain, I won't name any, but how much do they spend on coffee? They probably spend £50 a month on coffee alone or something. Well, and yet they can only afford £10 a month or £20 a month for protection. Where is the priority there, and has it been put across to them enough that there should be a different priority? We can always throw that one into the mix. Is it genuinely an affordability need, or is it a misunderstanding of the actual need for it? I think complexity, we touched upon that. I would argue that we are probably at saturation point or at the limit of how complex products can become, because we risk marketing ourselves out of actually anyone being able to understand what we do. So the more conditions we add on to a CI contract, with the more sort of partial payments and all the rest of it, it's going to become very difficult for anyone to explain, let alone clients to understand. So I think that is a challenge within an industry, is how do we outdo each other, which at the end of the day is what we're all in business to do, but how do we do it without risking losing the consumer and the advisor along the way. But speed, most definitely. I mean, if there, anything that can be done to get the client from A to B, namely application to decision, in a quicker way, is going to be welcome, I would imagine, throughout the entire market, both advisors and consumers alike. It will only ever be at smaller sums assured. Toby mentioned earlier, the larger sums assured, there has to be underwriting involved. So, you're generally looking at probably the younger, cleaner lives and the lower sums assured where you're able to actually do that. But at the end of the day, if there's anything that can be done without, advantaging some people without disadvantaging others, it's only going to be welcome throughout the industry as a whole.
And I think it is looking at that technology, because there is technology out there now that does sweeping of your bank accounts every day. So for example, you use the coffee example. If somebody's saying, I'm trying to save for something, I won't drink coffee, it will sweep every day. And if you haven't been to a well-known chain, it will still take that money out your bank account and put it in a savings account. And it can do very, so again, maybe we need to look at this sort of wider industry technology to see how it can work with us. So, is quicker underwriting the key to boosting the confidence in the advisors? The feeling that it's not going to be drawn out long reports, going back to the client, and more importantly, the client may be losing interest in that point. It's been advised, sold, whichever word you want to use, but 3 weeks down the line, it's still not on cover, and the client gives up.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've seen, we can all show you graphs of completion rates by time. So the time at which an advisor goes on and starts an application process, we know that if you get an underwriting decision within a matter of an hour or so, the completion rate is much, much higher than if it takes even a day. So there's a very clear fall off if you don't give an immediate decision. And we know there's a lack of confidence, so we know that there are advisors out there, a vast bulk of the total advisor population, who are not selling any protection or very limited amounts of it. And when we talk to them, because we've got a big pensions business, it is literally confidence. They don't know what's going to happen. So they're not prepared to potentially disrupt a relationship they have with a client to sell something that might come back with a result that they've got to then explain.
It's a bit of fear of the unknown, I think, isn't it? Whereas if there's an investment application, for example, that their client might want to do, they know what the outcome is. It's going to be a yes, and it's just how much do they want to invest. When they come to us as protection providers, it becomes a bit of an unknown for them. So they've got to hand over the process to us, they've got to hand over their treasured client to us, and hope they are looked after by the medical providers and by us, and hope that a GP report doesn't stall things. And I think they are all challenges that we as an industry have to, it's for us to actually manage that and make sure everything is done as slickly as possible. So whatever within the underwriting process can be done to further that and instill confidence in the advisor, particularly those who don't do protection for lack of a better phrase, to actually encourage them to take the step and leap into the unknown to actually submit an application when their client needs it, when they might not otherwise want to. And when they do, actually, well, that was remarkably easy. Things have moved on in the last 10, 15, 20 years. That was actually really good. Let's find other clients that we may have that have a similar need. Anything that can be done to engender trust throughout the industry, not just with the brokers and the advisors, but with clients themselves. There's always stats banded around about surveys that are done to customers and consumers of how many claims do you think are paid out, and they come up with 50-60% or something like that, which we know are miles off the mark. So as an industry, again, we can engender more trust by getting the message out about claims and how much they are paid, and really get the message across that we really, really do want to pay every claim that's put across to us, because it looks great if we could say 100% of claims are paid. Sadly, we can't, but we can get as close as we can. The numbers are very, very good. We just need to actually make consumers understand that is the case, which is an ongoing challenge.
Okay, on that positive note of paying out claims, we'll draw a close to the second part of our sessions today. So thank you, Toby. Thank you, Andy, for your time.
Thank you.
There'll be a 5-minute break now before we come back to our final session.